Anyway, enough of that. We all know why we're here. So what I'm going to do is read something. It'll probably go on for quite a long while and bore a lot of people, particularly perhaps the younger members of the audience. So I hope you'll bear with me. This is a story that I wrote just before Christmas. It's a creepy story, so probably the best place to be reading it is not standing up in a library on a sort of a reasonably bright day for this time of the year. But if you'll bear with me, if you'll imagine it's much darker, much colder, and the voice, I better explain the voice that I do this in. I'm not really sure why I do it in this voice. It was just the voice that came to me. And it's a big camp, and it's sort of a big Yorkshire. It sort of sounds like a kind of a more unpleasant Alan Bennett. But that's the way that it came out. So anyway, the story's called Cold Reading, which is the practice of unprincipled people who pretend to be making contact with the dead, where they can say, oh, is there anybody around who's lost somebody with the letter E in their name? And then they'll wait for somebody's face to light up and they'll say, oh, that's my Uncle Eric. And they'll say, yes, Eric, that's what I'm getting. And they will basically pretend a contact with the dead through these kind of spurious means. Anyway, this story is called Cold Reading. In the old black and white plate, the pool of shadow on the left of the ghost's face uncurled its legs to scuttle to the margin and the cluttered depth beyond. I shrank back in my seat, and no word of a lie, I genuinely felt it. It was over in a second when I realised it was just a garden spider come indoors out of the cold, what had been camouflaged against the darkness of the photo. But I really felt that sort of tingle up the spine as all my clients go on about. So I know what they're saying. I can empathise with them. It's not all acting. Actually, to be perfectly honest, I think 9 times out of 10 that gives us what I suppose you'd call a supernatural feeling. Something turning out to not be what we thought it was. I can remember I was only 6 or 7 when I saw my first and only ghost. I was with Mum and Dad in the lounge of a seaside pub at night, standing there glued to the glass doors and gawping out into the dark, not thinking of anything in particular. Just then, I saw this man walking across the car park of the pub, away from them. He wasn't any colour. He was all washed out and grey, and then I realised there were parts of him that I could see through. I could see the scrubby strips of grass, the bollards and the drooping lengths of chain that closed the car park in, through the black folds and shadows of his jacket. I thought, it's a ghost. I'm really seeing one. And then, and this was the most frightening bit, it turned its head and looked straight at me. It had got 2 blurry faces, one of them just slightly offset from the other, and it smiled in at me through the glass from out there in the night. And then it spoke my name. It's like I saw its lips move, but I heard its voice as if it was all right next to me rather than outside in the car park. It said, Ricky, would you like a Fanta? Obviously, it was my dad standing behind me in the lounge with his reflection superimposed on the dark outside. The business with the 2 faces turned out to be caused by double glazing. But just for a second there, you know, I thought it was a ghost and that it proved all of the stories that I've heard from other kids at school. I think it made me cry. When I explained why about the ghost and everything, Dad told me off and said I was like an old woman getting taken in by all that superstitious rubbish. Always very level-headed was my father, and I probably take after him in that respect, although I never really liked him much. I was much closer to me mum, but then that's very often how it is with boys, especially an only child. Dad passed on. I suppose Mum was my first audience, as well as being